And so we've got three amazing speakers here today. We've got Kiera Butler, who's a grief specialist with Alliance for Suicide Prevention of Larimer County, and also a graduate student at Naropa. And then we've got Victoria Cordova, who's the Director of Behavioral Health Services for Banner Health. And then Erin Hadlow, who is the owner of Intentional Attachment Therapy. Take it away, team.
Awesome. Okay, well, welcome, guys. So we're going to spend a little bit of time doing a more of a broad introduction of each other, just to make sure you know who we are. But we want to make sure you guys, we're going to call on you guys. We want this to be more interactive. So please be thinking when you hear where we come from and what we're doing, please be thinking about what questions you might have when it comes to career readiness, as well as any myths or anything that you're thinking about as far as things that are deterring from behavioral health versus questions in general. Because we're gonna call on you guys and ask what questions you guys might have. And then we also are going to try to get a good sense of who each of you are as well, just so we kind of know our audience. So would you like me to keep going real quick? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Great.
good. Great.
Great. Bio to start with.
Great. So, like she said, I'm Victoria Cordova. Currently, I am the Director of Behavioral Health Services for Banner Health. And I get to oversee a lot of amazing departments in Banner, some of them more behavioral health related than others. I get to really support a bunch of teams. We have crisis clinicians in our emergency departments that are licensed therapists that do crisis assessments for people who are suicidal, homicidal, gravely disabled, secondary to their mental illness. I also get to oversee our inpatient psychiatric unit that's in Loveland at McKee Medical Center. And so that's for people who are acutely unwell that are not safe to go somewhere else. I get to oversee our intensive outpatient programs for mental health that is at that same building. And then I actually get to help other really cool departments like volunteer services, chaplain, pastoral care services, and ballet, which is, also there. So a lot of the helpers, but it's just nice to know that, when you work in behavioral health, you can look at all kinds of options for what you get to work with and oversee. I'm a LPC, I'm a licensed professional counselor. I got my master's in marriage, family, child, and therapy. And I've actually not really done a lot of one-on-one or group therapy. I've done a lot more acute psychiatric type of services. And I did more like behavioral health case management for years and years on inpatient psych units, and was working more with patients one-on-one. And now I oversee other clinicians that are working with patients more one-on-one. And so that's most of my background in my master's program. My undergrad was in psychology and sociology, and I thought I was going to be a school counselor. But when I went to do some of my internships, I felt like I was still in that age group and it just wasn't really fitting well for me. It just like I just got out of high school. And so it just wasn't the right fit at that time. So I switched to marriage, family, and child therapy, thinking that's what I was going to do. And then I got an awesome opportunity to do an internship with offenders, sex offenders and domestic violence offenders in the community. And I loved that work because you really protect the community ends up being your patient rather than the person in front of you. And so anyway, I just ended up more on the acute psych side of things. So that's my career path. Would you like to go next?
Sure, I can go next. My name is Erin Hadlow, and one of the reasons I was really excited that I was asked to do this is I've worked in a lot of different areas. So I feel like I can I'm hopeful that I can give you some feedback about myths that people might have and some experiences. So you don't have, that's the other thing is I think mental health, it's so broad. And I think people don't realize that. They think you can only be like an individual therapist or family therapist. And there are so many things you can do with it. So I have been, I worked in the human services field before I went to school. So my bachelor's was in sociology, and I also was in criminal justice and psychology. Right then, my focus was really more on the criminal justice field. So I started out doing case management for like community corrections, then I got into long-term care options. And then after that, what I did was I went and I got certified as a peace officer, because my plan at that time was to become a parole officer. They had stopped hiring for the state, so what happened is I ended up getting hired by the Larimer County Sheriff's Office to coordinate their victim services program. And I just absolutely fell in love with doing advocacy work at that time. So that was a big part of what I did for a long time. And then I continued doing advocacy at different places, like the Sava Center, if you've heard of that. They work with sexual assault survivors in town. And then after that, I went over to work at Voices Carry, which is now, I think, the Crawford Center. But they do forensic interviews, and a lot of people have never heard of this, so I always bring it up because it's a magical place where if a child has been a victim of a crime, and probably 70% of what they work with is sexual abuse, they can go there and they talk to somebody who is able to do a forensic interview and then have everybody else listen, right? So they have usually an advocate there. They've got somebody from the Department of Human Services. They have a detective. So all these people can kind of come in and listen to what's going on. So the kid doesn't have to tell their story multiple times. And it's in a safe environment, because sometimes police stations can be a lot of us for adults, right? Let alone for kids. So while I was doing that, I went back to school. So I only graduated about 3.5 years ago. I went to Regis. And part of the reason I chose Regis, I would have chosen here, but it just did not work with my work schedule. So I ended up graduating in marriage and family therapy. And then I went on to work at 2 agencies in town. I worked at Life Stance and Foundations. And since I was marriage and family therapy, most of my focus was on kiddos, couples, and families. And then about a year ago, this was my eventual goal, was to open a private practice. And there's good and bad about private practice. It's amazing, but it can be lonely. So I also want people to know that too, to make sure that you're definitely out and coordinating with people in the field, and keeping up on things. Right now, I'm training with the Psychedelic Somatic Institute for ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And that's been a very long process. It's been 9 months, and I just finished didactics, and I'm into supervision. So there is such a broad range of things that you can do, and I'm hopeful that I can answer any questions that you might have around working with different types of clients, because I think that helps with preventing burnout, and I know we want to talk about that a little bit too. So thank you for having me here too.
Yeah, I'm Kiera, she, her pronouns. Probably the earliest in my career, I graduated from CSU, go Rams, clinical and counseling psych in 2019. And I think CSU really set me up for a nice career in the field, which was really such an honor and a privilege to come back and speak at it. But really, I found my way through internship in undergrad. So I was so annoyed by it. I thought it was neat. And I stumbled upon this small little nonprofit of like 2 employees called the Alliance for Suicide Prevention, but it's been around for 32 years, a long time. But they were kind of rebooting, and I found my way in as a youth program facilitator. So I was going into the community, talking about mental health and suicide prevention in almost all of the middle and high schools in Poudre School District. And then when 2020 hit, we received a very nice grant from the Office of Suicide Prevention to roll out programming to hopefully reduce suicide rates by 20% by 2024. And in that, there's 6 pillars that I won't get into, but one of them is postvention. And we really saw a gap in the community for supporting survivors of suicide loss. My boss was so amazing, Scott. He was like, "You want to be a counselor? Do you want to do this part of our work?" So I became the grief lady. I don't like the word specialist, but it sounds more professional. And so I work primarily with our suicide loss survivor community, rebooted and recreated all of our support groups. So working with adults online and in person, as well as our teen support group, for lost survivors primarily. Meeting with them in person, one-on-one, but also in the support group setting. And the reason I was able to do that was receiving an intentional peer support specialist certification. Peer support is such an amazing avenue in this community, and just in life, being able to resonate with the person that's in front of you. And I think a lot of people go into behavioral health careers after experiencing hardships themselves. So receiving that certification was an avenue for me to work with clients without going the master's degree route. But alas, I landed there as well. There's so much, as Emily was saying, there's so much that you can do in this field. And for me, having that licensure felt important to continue my path. So I'm in my second of 3 years of a master's program, and recently was working with teens in addiction. So now currently finding a new passion path of addiction and grief recovery. So combining the two, which has felt really sweet. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there so we have more time for questions and stuff.
Yeah, awesome. So, if you don't mind, and you could just do like this, you don't have to do this. Whatever, would you guys tell me if you're an undergrad? Can I get a hand if you guys an undergrad? Thank you.
Sure.
How about graduate? Anyone graduate level? Okay, everyone else is professionals level. Yeah. Thank you.
To that.
Thank you. It's nice to kind of know who's in the room. So, okay. So then, does anyone have any questions that we can start out with? It's okay if you don't, but please let me know. Any questions?
Yay! Right person in the room, I got it.
I think career ready is kind of like a interesting thing to put with behavioral health, because it does feel like to come into the industry, you kind of have to have a big heart and a bit of armor too. Like, and so do you have advice for, so it seems like anybody considering this has experienced themselves, family, friends, themselves, do you have advice for where to start if they're maybe not going to a school that has a program to help them find something? Like, how could you find like behavioral health, a helping career is right for you?
Who wants to start?
Okay. So, and I feel like this will lead into more of what I wanted to talk about too. I feel like one of the biggest things is that you have to do a lot of your own work. Some programs are really good about that in incorporating it, some are not. So and it's not just like you do your work and then you're great, it's ongoing work and it's all the time. I have a therapist that I will always see. To check in with. I just think it's very helpful to always be getting an outside perspective. So I think people doing a lot of their own work, you have to realize all your own biases, you have to learn your triggers, you have to learn your struggles. For example, I have a generalized anxiety disorder, but I'm here talking to you today, even though it's a little bit of a struggle for me, right? So I think it's really important that people do their work and they do ongoing work and they figure out what that looks like. And I shouldn't just say, because for some people it's not therapy, it's also a combination of other things. I do a lot of somatic work, so I'm always doing, like, my big things are Zumba and yoga and cycle bar. I love retreats. I think retreats are so helpful. I think coordinating with other professionals also to keep up on things. So I think that that's one of the big things when people are figuring out if this is the right field for them, is for them to also do a lot of their own work. And what I would challenge is that just because one area isn't good for them doesn't mean they're not great in another area. For example, I can't do grief work. And a lot of that is because of my time at the sheriff's office. I had to do so many death notifications. I was on so many death calls. that I will almost have like my own triggers sometimes that come up from that, right? So that's not what I work in. Now I work in sexual, I do a lot of work with domestic violence and sexual abuse, and there's so many people that are like, what? How do you do that? And I'm like, how do you do that, right? So I also tell people, I think it's really important to do a lot of internships, if possible. Talking to people in the field, stuff like this is amazing. And trying different places if you can, and recognizing that just because one doesn't work to one place isn't maybe the best fit for you, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, you just haven't found your niche yet. So that's kind of the big piece that I wanted to get from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's a good question. And it was the question I kept thinking when I heard the word career readiness in behavioral health. And I guess what I came to think was that you're never fully ready in the
Yes.
career of behavioral.
No, you're old.
Does that make sense? Like, so
Yes.
because you're in different life stages. I started off as a baby in mental health, and I didn't have kids yet. And then when you have kids, everything changes with, I wasn't married, and then you get married. And so your life is evolving too. And so just because maybe in the beginning you didn't have a certain trigger, you might in the future. And so career readiness, I think it's a duty of ours in the mental health field to advocate for ourselves, advocate for others, advocate for mental health in general, but then to always be getting continuing education, like we're all doing probably and are required to through our license.
Yeah.
But it's also important to be doing your own internal work, because that's always evolving and changing as well. I mean, we all are supporting everyone that just went through a global pandemic, but we also went through a global pandemic. Like, everything has shifted and changed, and there are little traumas in life and big traumas in life, and life happens. And so if you're not taking care of yourself in this field, then you're not going to be able to take care of others. And so I think that was like what I kept coming back to when I thought about this time together, is just you're always needing to be taking care of yourself to take care of others in a way that will always change and evolve. And it does, you can see we've done a lot of different career paths throughout our journeys. And all of those experiences are really good. And it's important to keep taking care of yourself through the process. That's probably what I would add. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing for me is, if you have a passion path and you're not seeing a position for it, I was lucky I found an organization that supported that. Nonprofit field is really beautiful for grant writing,
Yes.
donations. There's a way to, like, we saw a need in the community, and like, I want to do it. And I was able, and I'm so grateful. We just applied for all of the grants possible to allow me to have a career while also giving back. I think there is that notion that yes, I'm so about self-care, and it is proven that helping others helps your own mental health. So where is the balance in that? And how can you land in a field, in a space that allows for that titration and that cycle of helping someone else while helping yourself? Yeah, I'll leave it there. Sorry, thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably each go on quite a bit. Does that help with answering some of what you were looking for? And also, people don't have access with school or whatever else. I tell people volunteer. There are so many nonprofits, there's so many amazing organizations that you can get involved in and get a feel for what they do. The amount of resources are incredible in this town, and there's so many great places that you can go through and learn too.
That's actually one more thing. The element of, like, if you're on the right path, you'll feel refueled. Like, I remember studying, and there's still moments where I'm like, wow, I'm tired. Like, I need to maybe reduce my hours a little bit, or maybe this just isn't it for me right now, or how can I receive support to continue this path? Like, I started out doing youth programming, and at one point I was like, I can't keep these teens, like, I love them too much, I need to shift. And I had the support with the supervisor and other colleagues to shift that path, to now feel refueled by it every time. So I think that burnout slips in, as well as if you're on the right track, it can feel less overwhelming for my experience, at least, of like, I don't mind working 16-hour days sometimes because I really love it. And then I just make sure I can sleep in and like have a good breakfast the next day so I can keep going. Yeah.
Yeah.
What other questions did that spark? Does anyone else have a question for us? It's okay if you don't.
Oh, yeah, I do. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and I, want to get my master's. Then like, how do I know what is going to be best for me? Because I feel like that's the tricky part. It's like, do I want to do therapy? Do I want to do IO psych? Do I want to do forensic psych? Like there's so many different options.
Mhm.
And it makes me nervous to commit to one. And then I get the job and then I don't like it.
Yeah.
And so how do you kind of, because it's like you can volunteer at different places, but can I go sit in a class or like,
Right.
what would be your suggestion for that?
I have a few, but there's probably lots. It's a really, really good, big question that we're not going to have all the answers for. But thank you for asking it. I think that, whenever I have, at work, especially, we have a lot of people kind of growing through the different areas. And so we have some bachelor's level looking at master's level. And I have found personally, and for them, it's very helpful to call the different programs because typically the different programs has like a career counselor. CSU Global has a fantastic one. They will call you and really, try to connect with you because they'd like you to come. But they're also very good at giving you the class descriptions. They will talk to you about what careers people went into when they finished their programs. And I think that is just a lot of nice information to gather. So I always kind of tell people to call around or research online a little bit to just see some of those things. I had thought about getting a second master's in the MBA program through CSU Global. I looked at those class descriptions and said, no, thank you. Like it was enough. It was enough information for me. But I looked at the organizational development leadership and I was like, wow, that looks amazing. And so that was a good way for me to kind of know where I wanted to go for a second master's. So I think that's one really good avenue to look at. Another is I'm a huge, and I would have maybe added this, I know to the last question, I'm a huge fan of lots of different mentors. And so, so that would be the other thing that I like to point people to the direction of is, I think that we're gatekeepers in the licensing fields that we're in with counseling, and that we need to make sure we're getting people in and not making sure we have the right people in. And so we want to do a really good job at that. And so I would think that most all licensed practitioners would sit down and want to help supervise and mentor. And some of that could be, coffee, talking and walking, and just really diving into their experiences at all the places they've been, like we have, there's a lot of wealth of knowledge and a lot of people that just through all the connections to go talk to and learn from them and their personal experiences, because they'll be able to tell you what it's like out there. So those are two things I would suggest. What else?
I think that's the mentoring piece, so important. I think that's been really helpful. I was really grateful going back to school later because I had a lot of friends who are already in the field. So I was able to kind of talk to them about their different experiences. But what you said was really important about calling the schools and talking to them. So, and I don't want to, I'm sorry if I'm getting too specific, but I know a lot of people, I get this question a lot about like, what's the difference between doing like licensed clinical social worker, become a licensed professional counselor, or licensed marriage and family therapist, right?
Mhm.
Because that does really affect where you're going to go to school and your tracks. So there's a lot of things that are kind of wrapped up in that. So what I tell people is if they want something more general, a licensed clinical social worker is often a really good fit for people, because if you go specifically for a licensed professional counselor or licensed marriage and family therapist, you're going to be trained specifically for doing therapy for the most part. Now, I went back to school later in life, so I'd already done all this stuff in human services, so I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So for me, it was really easy to choose marriage and family therapy. Also, I've been to therapy for a while and I got to try a lot of different modalities and I found what worked best for me also. So I'm very big about systemic work. Marriage and family therapists were the people that love to go back to tell me about your childhood, tell me about your parents, right? So I think that it's really important for people to look at those different options and understand that it can be, you're going to get a lot more training specifically, but you are a little bit more limited in those areas. Like my program, I know a lot of other people who went to school, if they were say like a social worker or a professional counselor, they're not going to get training in like advanced couples therapy. Or I did a lot of training in school in sand play therapy, things like that. But I knew specifically that was what I wanted to do. The other reason I bring up these different, those 3 different ones is any school you go to, you need to make sure that they are also certified and will be accepted by licensure, because some are not. Like for licensed professional counselors, I believe it's KCRAP, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a separate one for licensed marriage. It's the co-ramped program. And if those are not, so if that's not something that the program will accept, you have to petition to even have your degree counted. So you want to also make sure that your program is going to be good if that's what your intention is for licensure later on. So I really encourage people to talk to different people, and therapists are always usually willing to talk forever about why they made their choice. And so talk to all different ones. And the other thing that's really important, there isn't a best. And if somebody tells you this is the best, it's what works for each person, right? So I hope that helps a little bit with those different specific pieces, because I chose my program based on when it was a co-amped program, which ones were the best marriage and family therapy, which basically came down to Regis and CSU. Regis just happened to work better because they had more nights and weekends where I needed during the day, right? Yeah. But yeah, there's so many things that I don't think you realize until you reach out and look at the requirements and make sure it's going to fit into your life. I mean, I was working full time and I had 2 small kids. So that was, the time factor was really important to me too.
Yeah, I feel like you, so much. I remember like journeying to figure out which grad program I wanted, and they will call you back. I still have like. So they are really great about telling you the programs, but for me, it was like, I know I want to be a therapist, and it was just a matter of like, okay, there's so many KCREP accredited schools. Naropa is actually KCREP equivalent, so it's not accredited, but I was like, okay, well, how do I get my license? And there's the people at the career centers know, and they will help you with that process. So I'll still get my LPC, but it's just gonna be a little tricky. It's a journey, but for me, it was really important. I was fortunate enough to study abroad when I was at CSU and started doing Buddhist studies, and I wanted a way to incorporate mindfulness and meditation and an alternate, less clinical route to counseling. And Naropa was like, every time I spoke or whispered about it, people were like, Naropa, and I was like, I wanted to move out of Colorado, and how am I still here? But it really was the program for me. So it is so true, like, figure out maybe potentially the destination that you're looking for, and then so many things will fall under it. So it's just navigating what aligns best with your schedule. And like me personally, we go on 2-week meditation intensives, and we're the only program that does that every semester. And that's something I really wanted because I have the ability to. It's just me, myself, and I able to traverse this world right now. So I didn't have to worry about kiddos or anything like that, but it is, I mean, I have support groups that I have to leave for 2 weeks at a time. So it really is navigating what fits best for you, and mentors. Like, we were in a restaurant the other day and Caroline, he's like, I need you. So there's ways to figure out what works for you. And I think having people to talk to and explore, and you're already doing it by coming to stuff like this. So.
Yeah, and I actually should correct what I said about the K-prep, like making sure that if they're not accredited, it's easy to get that, because I have done some friends who found some online schools and they still never got the programs accepted later on. Now, NOVOPA is very well known for, and it's not gonna be problematic. And I think also finding, like she said, of course, that maybe isn't focused in the clinical medical piece. You know, it depends on kind of where your focus is, right? So thank you for bringing that up too. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions, guys? We have time for a few more, if there are any.
I was gonna say, you had your hand raised again before.
I was gonna give opportunity for. So you all seem like you have different typical days of your careers. Is there, if you choose a career in behavioral health, is there a typical day, or depending what you do, you work nights, can you work weekends, can you work traditional hours? Can you find something that falls within that?
I mean, I'll start in terms of the, like, hospital setting. Hospital setting has it all. We have clinicians in the field that only work, not only, but are per diem as needed. So they kind of come help when they want and can. And typically those individuals do like 12-hour shifts, like a typical nursing type of shift, but they're doing counseling, crisis assessment work. And so 12-hour shifts are usually day shifts or night shifts. And then we do have full-time individuals that also do 12-hour shifts, which are some people love because you get all your work done in 3 days and then you're done for the week. And so we do have some of those that do that full-time and work 3 shifts a week, and those could be days or nights as well. So that's one way of kind of either doing days or nights. I work a pretty typical business hour type schedule. I do some on-call work, but that's because I'm more on the admin side of the whole hospital system. So sometimes I'm on call for every, boilers and all kinds of other stuff that can come up with hospitals. And so sometimes I'm on call, but I'm not on call for like crisis assessments or anything. Those people would come to our emergency department. We also have therapists in our intensive outpatient and therapists in our PCP clinics that do more business hours and see clients, patients, during the day, not really weekends. Some of our clinicians only work weekends. So there is a variety of opportunity within that type of setting. I've never personally worked nights, but I do have people that only work nights. And so all kinds of things there. What else?
It can differ so much depending on what you decide to do. The other thing I always encourage people to do also, I have a lot of friends who are marriage and family therapists, and this is not wrong. You can go straight into private practice, but if you haven't had a lot of experience in your community, I think it's really incredible and important to go work for an agency, because you can get, speaking of mentors, I've had so many amazing mentors that I'm so lucky with Val from Child Safe. I had Brody Shelson is absolutely amazing therapist that I got over at Life Stance. And I think it's very helpful to have other people you're learning from in the beginning, groups. So I do like to put that out there about that piece. The thing is with agencies, oftentimes some will have you work evenings. Sometimes there's a requirement of like how many clients you have to see. I really enjoyed it because I learned a lot about insurance. I learned a lot about Medicaid. I learned a lot about diagnosis that I just learned in theory, right? That I got to actually experience, that I thought was really exciting. And my goal was always eventually private practice. I was really scared to do it because I'm not great with tech. I'm not great with business, but I tell people, I'm like, you can do it. It's not about what you don't know. It's knowing what you don't know and then getting help for those things, right? And I love being able to do that because now I have the flexibility to take on as many clients or as few as I want and the different types. And that's what's been helpful for me. I have found I tend to, for example, burn out more quickly if I'm only seeing, like when I was only seeing 7 to 11-year-old female girls, child sexual abuse. I decided that was just too much for me. Now having a broad range is really helpful. And sometimes I switch around. Like sometimes right now I'm kind of couples heavy. I have a lot of couples. I have a handful of kiddos. I like to see teens also. And most of my work is with trauma and anxiety. My work schedule is Wednesdays through Saturdays. because that's what works best for me. And the reason I did Wednesdays through Saturdays, for example, is, I usually wanted to be home for dinner with my kids, things like that. But I still love seeing teens. And so if you're gonna see somebody like kiddos or teens, a lot of times you gotta see them after school. So you need to either decide evenings or, and it's usually the same for couples, right? So that's why I have my Saturdays. I personally loved it. That's not for everybody. Usually I would be the only one in the office, or now that I have private practice, it's like inside of a doctor's office also. So I'm able to kind of have my own space, and I really like that. When I'm really busy, like I am now, I take on Mondays. I start seeing clients on Mondays too, so I can up it or I can make it less. And I love being able to have that flexibility. So there's a lot of options. That's what I want people to understand. There is not one way, and a lot of it, you have to, sometimes you tailor depending on the clients that you're seeing too.
Yeah. What I love about this field is like it is, you can tailor it and sometimes you can't. And it's really just depends on the population you want to work with. And if you're doing private practice or working for an organization, but even within my organization, I have the freedom, which feels really joyful for me, but some people really thrive on structure. So we've had people come into the Alliance and they're like, I make my schedule, and we're like, yes, you do. And they're like, no. So you have to figure out what works for you and also being proactive in that. Yeah, not much else.
Good. Awesome. We do have a few more minutes. Anyone else have a question that they had wanted to ask? Okay, it's okay. How about you ladies? We all thought we'd think about some myths or some questions we would have asked if we were in this room in school. So did we touch, is there any that we didn't touch on that you might speak to now?
I feel like I want to expand a little bit more about that myth of like, if you have a mental, if you have some of your own mental health issues, that you can't be a therapist. And I always challenge that. I do think that sometimes there's those expectations that therapists are like, they have it all together. The majority of us that, the majority of it, and that's a huge myth. First of all, lies, all of it lies. What I try to tell people, like, it doesn't, because you go to school for therapy, doesn't mean you have your life all together. What you have is better skills to deal with what life throws at you, right? The majority of us who go into this field have had our own challenges, whether it's our own mental health, family members who have a lot of mental health, or a combination of those pieces. And I think that's really important. And I want people to hear that, because unfortunately people do get that kind of feedback all the time. Like for instance, when I went into marriage and family therapy, one of the myths, the things that I used to get from people, that would be like, you're divorced. Why are you, how are you doing marriage and family therapy? Right. And or people, for example, when I would do couples therapy, they would say, what are your success rates? And I'm like, what do you define as success? Right. And so there's a misconception that people go to couples therapy to stay together. No, they go to kind of figure out what's happening and understand their patterns, understand their attachment styles, get some education and communication skills, right? It's a little bit different maybe than what people think. So I want to talk about this because those were a lot of the things that I feel like I heard over and over again. And a lot of it's just also about keeping yourself healthy too, while you're going through this. She said so much when we're talking about like the ongoing, if you don't like to learn, this is not a good field for you. You are always learning, because the field is always changing. There's always new modalities coming out. There's new pieces you're learning. And it's not just, and just honestly, even with the continuing education credits, I feel like almost aren't enough for how much we're always learning, and everything is kind of transitioning. So that was my little piece that I wanted to do about, and I don't know if either of you have pieces to add on to that myth, because I think that's one that I've heard probably the most.
Yeah, I think that's what I love so much about peer support is you're able to just say, I'm human too, like I've been through this, and that's the importance of doing your own work as well. If I'm sitting with another suicide, loss, or attempt survivor, and then I'm just talking about myself, it's not as productive. But being able to say, I've been there, like, how can I support you in this? Like, I get it. And so having that balance, is so valuable, and I'm really big on integrity, so I'm not gonna go tell a client to do this modality or do their work if I haven't done my own. It's been really big working with teens in addiction. I'm not gonna go tell them to not drink with their friends if I'm gonna go do that too, right? So that for me is a huge piece. So figuring out your values and your beliefs and then finding what might align with that is really helpful as well. Yeah.
Did you have anything else that you had wanted to make sure we touch on?
Yeah. I feel like we touched on a bit.
We did.
I feel like there was more we talked about, so.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk, because I know burnout was a big piece. I don't know if there's any other pieces you wanted to talk about. I guess I just want to touch on people, reminding them that you can shake it up, you can do different things, because burnout in this field is very common. And so I think, again, figuring out your self-care and figuring out the place that works for you, is very helpful.
I don't remember what famous person said this, but they were talking about the difference between compassion fatigue and empathy fatigue. If you're a loving and caring person that wants a career in behavioral health, you probably will never run out of compassion. It's empathy that we run out of. And so that for me is my titration. If I feel like I have a lack of empathy for someone or a client that's sitting in front of me, that's when I know I need to step back and do a little bit more of my own work. As well as if I'm losing empathy for myself. If I'm just putting clients first, then I'm not able to show up in a way for myself that's healthy. I realize like I'm getting sick or my stomach really hurts. So learning those internal cues for yourself can be really valuable. But when someone rephrased it as empathy fatigue, it really flipped for me. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So I have a question related to that. So like people, big point of this is like career ready. So as like students are preparing to go into careers, how can they approach those like internships or like hire scenarios in a way where they can like set expectations for like the opportunity they'll have to kind of do that self-care?
Your question, like boundary setting?
Yeah.
That's what I heard. That's what I felt like I was hearing. I really think that'd be a good hiring strength. I would love to hear someone that wants to set those healthy boundaries for themselves. Because I think that means that they put a lot of thought into this career for them, and that they want to make sure they have boundaries to really do a good job, a quality job, and be able to do it for a long time. So I think being very honest with what you need is really important. So therapists, counselors, mental health workers in general need healthy boundaries. That's a huge, very important trait that is just embedded in every single thing that we do. And so to be able to demonstrate that from the very beginning, and being humble, vulnerable, honest, and saying, I might need help learning what those boundaries are, but I want to be able to have a good dialogue about that. I think that's perfect. So what you said is exactly what I think you would want to say to the people around you if you're talking to them about, and it might not be the right fit if you don't feel like the boundary is being heard or respected.
Yeah, and that's what I kept thinking of when you be authentically yourself when you
Yeah.
interview. You don't want to be in a place that does not work for you. The other thing I tell people is just because it's a mental health industry does not mean it is a healthy organization either. Okay. If it's in- I can ask you those questions, and if you get pushback, right, or then it's like, okay, this maybe isn't the place for it's like any other industry, right? So I think it's really important. I just showing up, and I think spending time like you were talking about, like, what do I need? What do work hours look like? Am I okay working weekends? Are the things that they're telling me are things that I learned were ethical in school, right? Are these lining up with my values and my core values and what I want my life to look like? So, yeah.
Yeah, we're about to end, but I love boundaries. They're so important. And sometimes you don't know when you're coming up against one until you're already there. So when you're interviewing, I know the buzzword around in 2020 is self-care. And I like to use personal restoration. And I just went through the interview process for internship and I received offers from every single site. And I believe it's because of the one question I asked, and it was, how do you promote and support personal restoration for your employees? And like, this is a value for me. And all of them were like, that's a good one. So I really think like that it was just like a more professional way of saying self-care, but and asking like, how do you support your employees when they realize they're coming up against one of those boundaries? And
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's an important one. All right, guys, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're having a good time. Thanks.
thanks, Dr.
Oh, we have cards up here. You're welcome to take cards. If you don't want to waste paper, I tell people I've got like a, you can just scan it too. Feel free to call me if anybody has questions.